Welcome back to episode 138 of the Guardian Project podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and I just love winter. It's the time of ice.
Oh, okay. Well, at least it's not the dead of winter. Well, it kind of is the dead of winter right now, too.
Oh, that's actually an even better one. Blood in the snow.
Oh, jeez.
No.
Yikes. And I'm your other host, Mike. And the previews coming out for this latest set, I really think they got the title wrong. With all the support they're getting, they might as well call it Kamigawa Nyanbi Dynasty.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Please listen carefully.
And this is the podcast where we talk about all things Magic the Gathering.
But mostly Commander.
So we're going to jump actually right into our main subject in just a couple of minutes. Coyle, what do we have going on today?
It's a very exciting day. We're actually joined by Andy Bentley, one of our patrons. This will be the first time we actually have one of our patrons on for their patron exclusive episode. And today we're going to be chatting about aggressive strategies in Commander.
Yes, and before we do that, we want to thank everybody who listens to us and thank everybody who supports us through Patreon. If you want to support us, you can head to patreon.com/GuardianProjectPod and donate for any dollar amount.
And if you're looking for another way to support the podcast, whatever platform you are enjoying the podcast on now, if you could subscribe, rate, review, and leave comments, we'd be much appreciative.
And if you want to find us online, you can find us at theguardianprojectpodcast.com. We stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/GuardianProjectPodcast. Our social media is at Twitter at GuardianPod, on Instagram at GuardianProjectPodcast, and we have gameplay videos at youtube.com/theguardianproject. And if you want to email us, you can email us at guardianprojectpod@gmail.com. Now, I have a need for speed. So this is a really, really special week for us. It has been at least, I would say, 6 months in the making, but we are joined by Andy Bentley. Andy, how are you today?
Wonderful.
That's right. One of them.
Nailed it. We are so happy to have you on, and we honestly cannot thank you enough for your support of our show. And we're really excited to talk today about aggressive strategies in Commander, which you have become known for, and we've seen a lot. And before we do that, tell us a little bit about you. How long have you been playing Magic, and where do you see yourself in, I guess, the Commander sphere as far as a player goes, and how often you play?
Let's see. I started playing Magic in 2011.
Okay.
And kind of fell into that standard loop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That everyone kind of falls into at one point. And then rotation hit, and I said, no.
You started just before me. So 11 was it Innistrad in standard then?
So Innistrad was in standard, but I started just after Innistrad, so I kind of missed out on a lot of that.
And I started just after you. And as far as Commander goes, how long have you been playing Commander, and what would you say you're known for?
I started playing Commander in 2014. My cousin kind of introduced it to me at first, and I kind of fell in love with the idea, and then I got my brothers into it, and we kind of had our own little pod until COVID decided to break it all apart.
It did that to all of us, didn't it?
But a lot of times when I sit down at a table, most people are going to expect me to play creatures and turn them sideways.
Have you always been that way? Have you always played that sort of strategy? Like even when you were in your standard loop, when you first started playing, were you typically playing more aggressive decks?
Yes. The thought of like even a Spellslinger deck was never really in the back of my mind. It was always, well, I have a thing, and the thing is going to reduce your life total to 0, so I'm going to use...
That's just simple math right there. You just my power minus your life total. No, your life total minus my power. I know how to do math. Come on.
With our powers combined.
Well, see, that's the joke. I don't know how to do math because math is for blockers.
That's true, too. Yeah, I guess so.
So start us off by explaining your definition of aggro or aggressive for folks that are new to Commander, and how you've started to utilize this strategy.
Okay, so the first thing you really need to look at aggro in Commander is it is not the same as other formats.
Okay.
Yeah.
where your goal is to just say, hey, nice to meet you. I don't need to know your name. I just need your life total at 0.
I would agree.
Yeah, and you're and you're playing in like a pot of 4 rather than like 1v1 too, like, right? Okay.
Exactly. So my definition of aggro is taking every initiative you can to lower all life totals.
Okay. So not just single targeting somebody out, not just going after one person in particular, but you spread it out.
That's a good way to get yourself hated off of the table.
That is true. So if you want to kill everyone at the same time, but also I imagine you want to do it quickly.
Exactly.
Okay. So what other things do you, like, I guess, associate with that sort of strategy? Like, are you trying to go tall in that you want your creatures to be super high power, or go wide in that you just want to be able to swing with so many creatures that your opponent just doesn't have enough to block with? Like, or are both strategies viable aggressive strategies?
Well, that's the wonderful thing about aggro and commander is it's as diverse as the commanders that you play, because some want to go tall, some want to go wide, some just want to burn people out.
Okay, that's so burning people out, as in, so you could, I know you said you're not really into the Spellslinger style, but you could consider a Spellslinger style deck to be somewhat of an aggressive deck if that's what it's doing, if it's burning your opponent out.
Absolutely.
So in an aggro deck, we're going for life totals early. How do you commit to the board in most of your aggro decks? Are you finding you're most successful, and by successful, just achieving the goal, right, of getting your opponents to 0 as quickly as you can, through more aggressive decks that play more creatures, or through an aggressive deck that plays less creatures but larger creatures?
In my case, I tend to go with a higher volume of creatures. For the most part, you basically always want to have a board presence, but that also means you need to know when to stop committing to the board so you can hold stuff back in reserves.
It's smart. Something I've never learned to do, ever.
Please, yes, continue to play out your creatures, because I'm going to board wipe in a turn. So I guess maybe let's just ask, what is one of your most successful aggressive decks, or maybe your first? Let's start with your first. When did you first start playing an aggressive strategy, and do you have any particular commander that stands out to you that was like, yes, this is a strategy I like and this is how it works?
One of my first purely aggressive decks was actually 5-color allies.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Which at the time got a lot of flack because General Tazri at the time was also a medicine CDH.
Yeah, it was being played with like food chain and stuff. Yes, I've heard the stories.
I don't own a food chain. I never intend to own a food chain. Mine was just really cheap, aggressive creatures that triggered off of everybody entering the battle.
So those allies can be mill. Some of them, I guess, give lifelink. Some of them, are there allies that do direct damage to face when an ally enters? I'm not familiar. I actually haven't played an ally deck, and I don't think I played one at all last year when we were recording.
I think there's some black color allies that drain.
Tuk Tuk Scrapper is a red goblin ally for 3 and a red.
Okay.
When it enters or another ally enters, you can destroy an artifact and then dome the person whose artifact you destroyed for the number of allies.
Oh, all right. So there is some direct damage in this. So I assume then that deck was you would commit as much as you could to the board, right? Because if you do get a board wipe, you're going to trigger less off of that actual ally mechanic. Now, were you running a reanimate package in that deck out of curiosity, with it being reanimator in case that did happen a few times?
I was.
Okay, that's smart. And
you're in 5 colors. That makes sense.
Yeah, and you know, there's a drawback. You know, we talked about holding some cards back in your hand because you don't want to commit too much to the board. But General Tazri is a card advantage in itself. It's the ETB trigger where you get to just find allies, right? So you could play it kind of like a blink strategy and not even use any of the cards in your hand, where a lot of aggressive strategies, you know, when I think of aggressive strategies, I kind of associate it with mono red. And I know we are definitely not in mono red when we're in this episode, but that's what I look at. And I tend to hellbent myself. And hellbent, if you're not familiar, is actually something that some cards say if you're hellbent means you don't have any cards in your hand. And so it's like, not having card draw seems to also be somewhat of a theme associated with aggressive strategies. But, in a case where you just get to tutor the cards rather than have to play them from your hand, you get right around that. It's pretty smart.
Yeah, and actually there's a lot of other ways you can get around the aggro or the mono white, like not being able to ramp or card draw. And a lot of times when you're talking about going Hellbent, you're doing a second stage of what I look at aggro decks to do. And that is you have to force them to have it.
Yes, I love that stage.
It is pretty nice. I actually don't have many decks. Well, no, okay, so my Morophon deck, probably. My Morophon Humans deck is a force you to have it. But that's just because I don't hold anything back and I commit to the board. Because when a creature's free to cast because of my Morophon, I can't hold it back. But my other deck, Tetsuko Umezawa, Fugitive, is a mono blue, low to the ground. But that has to commit to the board too, because I can only hit for 1 damage or 3 damage. It allows creatures with power or toughness 1 or less to be unblockable. And if I get my Mist Syndicate Naga, which is a 3/1 that replicates itself every time it deals damage, I'll force people to have it. But other than that, it's like even with that, I shouldn't say unless, even with that, I have to commit really hard to the board, and I often get blown completely out because of it.
True, but with a deck like that, how many other ways are you giving unblockable to yourself?
In that deck, not very many. I don't know how well that deck is built.
Yeah, it's still pretty quick though.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but if I was in blue, I would focus more on unblockability, not just on my commander, but in, I don't know, maybe a third of my deck.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you get to do cool stuff with ninjas.
Yeah, for sure. So in your aggro strategies, do you think that you rely pretty heavily on natural card draw versus mentioning having a tutor for a card that is going to get you there? Or are you finding that you're just naturally drawing into it and hoping for the best? Or do you think that they're specifically built to function that way?
For the most part, I let the natural draw kind of handle things.
Okay.
But again, there's corner cases. Like in Linden, one of the best decks is just a stupid 2-mana enchantment called Dawn of Hope. It's 1 and a white for an enchantment that does nothing. But you can pay 3 and a white to make a 1/1 human token with lifelink. But more importantly, whenever you gain life, you can pay 2 to draw a card.
Yeah.
And Linden's trigger separately for each white creature that attacks. So you attack with 5 white creatures with that mana, you draw 5 cards.
Yeah, no, that's a really great card in that deck, and funny enough, there's some aggressive decks. One that I've played in the past, like Edric Spymaster of Trest, where I might not be tutoring, but because of the nature of the actual commander, it doesn't really, I guess, affect me. So Edric being a 2/2 elf rogue that says whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. So if I'm playing out, 4 or 5 rogues and then playing Edric and drawing 4 or 5 cards a turn, effectively is keeping my hand refilled. Now we both, Andy and I, share a deck with Tovolar. So we are both playing an aggressive werewolf deck. And I, now that it's been out for a few months, I'm curious on what you've thought of Tovolar and I guess how it lines up with your other aggro decks. Is it feeling like an aggro deck, or is it feeling more of a mid-range deck? Because I feel like the way I built mine, I'm feeling in the middle and I'm not the fastest.
I built mine to put creatures in the red zone.
Okay.
Again, the deck is kind of one of those force them to have it, because if they don't remove Tovolar after turn 4, they're just going to take huge swaths of damage.
Exactly. So for those listening, Tovolar is the new werewolf from Midnight Hunt. It's a 3/3 for 1, a red and a green, and it says whenever a wolf or a werewolf deals damage, you get to draw a card. And then it has a flip side that has the same text. It becomes a 4/4, but then has an ability that you can pay to give your wolves +X+O and trample until end of turn. So it's similar to Edric in that we're getting some card draw now in a tribe that had previously not had that card draw, or a commander that really flipped the werewolves very easily. So it's nice to see Tovolar fitting into this aggressive strategy with a lot of moving pieces, because those cards are flipping back and forth a lot onto their front and back sides.
Yeah, just a comparison with Edric. Edric really doesn't care about particular creature type or anything. It's just whenever a creature deals damage to an opponent, the player that dealt that damage gets to draw a card. And so Edric had the ability to play with these unblockable creatures and these flying creatures with evasion. And Tovolar, it has to be a werewolf. And so I had a couple questions for both of you on this. One, do you play any non-flipping werewolves? And by that I mean changelings that maybe have flying or something built in. I know you're limited to the green and red colors, but then at the other time, the aggressiveness of you kind of have to introduce trample into. You have to trample over your opponents a lot of the times in order to get that damage through and get that card draw, and that probably feeds into the aggressive strategy. But is that something that you had to implement in the deck to build around, or was there enough werewolves already with trample? Or I know Tovolar has an activated ability to pump some stuff too, if that becomes a very useful thing in order to just get the card draw. So I know I just asked 3 questions, so go ahead.
Yeah, Andy, you tackle one of the questions. I'll figure out what the other 2 were, and then I'll go from there.
All right. In my particular case, I'm not running any changelings. I made my decision to build my deck where most of my keywords come from my creatures. Mm-hmm. So there are, I believe, 3 werewolves that give trample to everything.
Okay.
But we're also running some of the enchantments that specifically care about werewolves that give trample. Just cards that allow you to attack and not necessarily care about if they block or not, because you're swinging with a 6/6 with vigilance and trample, and the best they can do is chump it.
Yeah. Okay.
I do have one in my deck, and I am running Realm Walker from Call Time. So it's a 2/3 shapeshifter for 2 and a green. It says, as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You may look at the top card of your library at any time and cast a creature that shares a type with it. So I am running, everything else is either a human werewolf or a human shaman. I'm running Master of the Wild Hunt, so that is actually not a wolf or a werewolf at all. Most of my damage is getting through because of trample. I added in Xenagos, God of Revels, the enchantment god, to give my creatures +X until end of turn, and haste, but even that doesn't give trample. So I'm really just relying on large creatures and getting through with trample myself.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Got to get those cards in. Now, Andy, Voltron Strategies. Do you have any aggressive Voltron decks?
I used to, and I'm working on one, and I tore another one apart.
Okay, so Voltron being 21 commander damage, right? So you're working to win with your commander. What was your last Voltron commander deck that you had, and what are you looking to build?
Okay, so the last one was Rogrock and Kelith, the Sunmane familiar.
Yeah,
red-white. Okay.
Yep. So red-white, the goal was get Rogrock down, put as many things on it as possible, and then just start pumping tokens out, counters onto him with A, the commander, and then B, the sword of blue and white, Truth and Justice.
That's my favorite sword. The sword of anti-Andy Flory is what I call that one.
It is. It's the sword of protection from most things that I play. And what are you looking to build?
So I'm actually currently working on Nizan Reverent Bladesmith. Which is I'm building it because my new logo is actually heavily based on his art.
That makes sense. That's cool. Yeah, because coming down on the sword with his hammer, Nizan's hammer, right?
Yes. The differences in mine is I'm using a Colossus hammer on a Sword of Feast and Famine.
That is pretty good.
Now, Mike, do you think that your General Grievous Zergo Helm Smasher deck fits into an aggro strategy, or do you not think that it fits in being a deck that can win off of Voltron?
It's definitely aggressive strategy. The number one thing is trying to suit up my Zergo Helm Smasher / General Grievous with as many lightsabers / swords of X and Y as possible. It's the most effective strategy in terms of taking one person out, because I do not follow the strategy of spread the damage. I try to kill one person as fast as possible. And honestly, with Voltron, unless you're taking extra combats or something, it is impossible to kill all 3 people with Voltron damage, with commander damage, because you can only have one commander. Even if you have copies of that commander, only one of them counts for commander damage. That deck does have a nice little side theme of, the droids and stuff from the original, or not the original, from the Star Wars trilogy episodes 1, 2, and 3. Which kind of helps you with
ones, the ones that we all had to get through.
The ones I grew up with, and I did.
Misa didn't like them.
The ones I saw in theaters, and I didn't see the original 3 in theaters, so they mean something to me. But it helps with so the biggest drawback to Voltron Strategies really is just you only have one creature. So if they can block it, or if they can do an edict effect to make you sacrifice it, or just simply destroy it, you have to kind of rebuild. But at least you don't commit to the board too heavy with creatures that you might not actually be able to reanimate or bring back to your hand. But you might get got by a remove all artifacts, remove all of my swords of X and Y, and now I just have my 7/3 commander that really can't get through anywhere. So
Zergo Helm Smasher, for those unfamiliar, it's a commander. It's a 7/2 haste. It attacks each combat if able. It has indestructible as long as it's your turn, and it says whenever a creature dealt damage by Zergo Helm Smasher dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Zergo. So it's never going to stay at 7. It's going to become much larger. And once it's getting protection from all those colors, sometimes it's just a 1/2 punch. And I have been on the receiving end of that 1/2 punch before.
A long time ago, I had a different Voltron deck that I didn't even consider it Voltron to begin with, but it was my Lord of Tressorhorn deck. Which was a Grixis. So for 1 and Grixis, blue, red, black, you get a 10/4 zombie. It says when it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice 2 creatures and lose some life. But as long as you are able to have 2 other creatures, or maybe you have a Torpor Orb out, which prevents enter the battlefield effects from triggering. In his case, it's a negative effect. You get a 10/4 that I simply just pump with 1/+1/+1 counter or something, and then give it double strike, and I was able to take people out. So I was playing Voltron before I knew what the Voltron strategy really was, because that was my zombies deck originally.
I guess my last question on this for both of you. In a deck that's playing Voltron and it has the color black, are we fans of Tainted Strike just to give it infect?
Oh, of course.
Absolutely, but I had Tainted Strike for my Nekusar deck, which isn't necessarily Voltron, but could still be considered a pretty aggressive strategy.
Indeed. So speaking of infect, I think my current aggressive deck, I think it's probably my most aggressive is Finn the Fangbearer. So it's a Death Touch tribal. So it's a 1/3 human warrior for 1 and a green, and it says whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So it's not infect, but it's infect. So it's not infect with air quotes. That's how I explain the deck. It's not infect, wink, wink. And I feel like this deck, obviously I only care because I only have to hit someone 5 times with Death Touch creatures. Mm-hmm. And it has done its job in the past. Actually, the first game I ever played with it is on YouTube, so you can go check out our YouTube channel to see how that worked out. But I think this is one of those decks that has fallen to the everyone has figured out how to get around this, which is just keep removing Finn. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can't do anything.
So a fun point about that, that's why I built my Finn deck, to get around people removing it.
So you include other creatures and other ways to give infect, or do you just use Finn to do the initial infect and then start proliferating?
No, I'm running every single mono green protection spell that I could get my hands on.
Okay. So you went with that. So you play it kind of like a Voltron in that your commander is so important to the deck that you must have it protected at all times. And I guess you get some sort of advantage in some ways being, I know you would maybe think of it as a disadvantage in being mono green, but there's a brand new equipment called Commander's Plate. I say brand new. Commander Legends was 2019, 2020,
2019,
something like that. Yeah. So the equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity, and it costs 1, and it only costs 3 to equip to your commander after that. So for 4 mana, your protection from everything but green, and the green spells that are going to be able to kill your commander are probably fight spells, in which case whatever they're fighting you with is going to die because Finn himself has Death Touch. So yeah, no, that's really, really smart.
Yeah, I think the fight spells in that deck really make it, an interesting play, because you can play fight and you're assuming the creatures are going to be large, but then you're like, I'm going to have you fight my 1/2 Death Touch Reach Spider. That's a 1/2. Oops, your giant thing.
And then I'm going to re-end
Exactly. So, again, player removal, I guess, through poison counters is also aggressive when you only have to get in a few times. This is also one of those decks that I find has a significantly higher win rate when you're playing in pods of 3, because you have far less people to remove or get only, 5 hits in on.
Yeah.
So again, player removal is permanent removal. So I guess, Andy, do you find that you target specific people that have a strategy that kind of negates yours? And that might be a silly question. And
if you're trying to shut me down, I will take you out.
Yeah. If you're making, the person that has an Elish Nord in their deck from past experiences. I can't let this happen. This is an aggro deck with small creatures. I'm so sorry. I can't let that resolve. And I'm not playing blue. So you have to just not be here for it to resolve. So speaking of your experience as an aggro player, how does your Rule Zero chats or your pregame discussions go as far as your aggressive decks when you want to play those in a game?
Well, as two people who have sat down with me during those conversations, I think you can attest to a lot of times I'll kind of bring out a couple of decks and say, hey, I could play this or this or this. And then I kind of let people say, oh yeah, we haven't seen this in a while, or yeah, I want to see that. And then I kind of give them a rundown of what the deck's going to do.
Okay. So
you lay out the main cards in the strategy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, does it change if you are putting out your Voltron deck or something? I mean, is it? So the reason I like this question is because a lot of people, when they do have a Voltron deck or an aggro deck, they know that, a board wipe or something or an artifact wipe is going to get them. So they kind of are a little skittish about giving away too much about their deck. So that's why I wanted to ask about this rule. Like, do you ever feel like you give too much information and that people will know, like, oh, my deck is completely built around my commander, so if my commander goes, I'm screwed, and then it's like, oh well, then they're just going to keep targeting your commander and over again. Like, do you ever withhold any information in order to have a better time playing the game?
I'll never really tell whether a deck absolutely needs its commander to function.
Okay.
But I figure I'm going to be honest in the talk, and if they feel like they need to hose me by pulling a specific deck, then that's on them, not me.
Well, not necessarily pulling a specific deck, but maybe playing a specific strategy in their deck, focusing on, if I can shut down the aggressive player early, then late game I'm going to be okay. But maybe you withhold some information where it's like, oh, but late game I also have a giant spell that I can go off and win with as well. Like, maybe if you had an alternate win condition in your mono white deck, but it's an aggro deck at heart.
So just to be completely clear, if they want to try and hose the aggro deck, that's perfectly fine.
It's just the aggro deck's going to start coming after them as soon as they start trying to.
Exactly.
Okay. 100%. Okay.
I feel like I've seen that strategy play out before, and it wasn't even just hosing, but Andy has an Adeliz, the Cinderwind deck, and so it's a blue-red fast wizards deck, and that deck, it does have some counter magic in it, right, Andy?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a quick deck that can support itself when someone goes to play that Blasphemous Act or whatever, and you know what? Not this turn. Give me one more swing with my wizards, and then we'll see. But it's also got card draw, and I actually, that's one of my favorite. One of your aggro decks is in blue red, which we're not always seeing as an aggressive strategy. We're usually seeing it as a spell slinger strategy, which I guess they're kind of meshing now, right? And I think that's a really cool way that you're able to actually, I guess, mitigate a potential bad pregame chat by targeting the right player first. So talking about targeting the right player, are there certain things you look for when targeting somebody in a deck? Are there maybe precursors to cards, or you're seeing their deck play out a certain way in certain cards, and you go, oh gosh, this is going to be really bad in 2 turns if I don't start trying to turn the tide now?
The 2 main things I'm going to look at is how much does your commander cost, and can you play it by turn 2?
Ooh, by turn 2. Okay, yeah, that's fair. In an aggressive strategy, you want to make sure that they have as few blockers as possible. So I guess you're looking at commanders that are more expensive.
So let me give you this hypothetical.
Okay.
Let's say I sit down with Linden, you sit down with Niambi, Parker sits down with Goreclaw, and then Coyle sits down with what's a fun deck? His Abzan tokens.
Okay.
Out of those options, who do you think I'm going to attack first?
Wow, I feel really attacked right now with Niambi costing 2 mana, and everybody says, "Oh wait, you passed on turn 3." No, it's because I'm going to flash Niambi in. I'm not going to play.
Not
that
only
right
do you have a 2 mana commander, but going back to something that you yourself, Andy, said earlier, you also have an Elishnorn in there, don't you?
Oh, crap. I'm playing Elishnorn, and I'm also playing Jin Gataxius, and no one likes that either. Listen, it's fair that deck gets targeted first. And as we saw in the stats episode, it came in 4th, or I guess got targeted first most often than any of my other decks, which completely makes sense. Yeah, that's great. I certainly understand that. Have you had any negative experiences playing aggressive decks against low mana value commanders? I know I haven't seen it in quite a while, actually, even in any of the pods we've played with, but have you played against like a Hapatra Vizier of Poisons that are maybe taking out your creatures one by one, or any decks that are playing just constant board wipes and having to fight an uphill battle? Or are you finding that most of your pregame chats now are going pretty well and everybody's on the same footing?
It does happen occasionally. My brother has a Hapatra deck that is insanely powerful.
Okay.
And he doesn't realize it, but it is.
Sure. And I would think that like my Jessica Falthus deck might have a very similar effect, because it's just about killing creatures over and over and over again.
Yeah. Then the other part of that is, if an aggro deck kind of peters out, 9 times out of 10, you would have done enough damage to the table at that point that the game's not going to last much longer. You can just shuffle up and play again.
Yeah, I like that part of it, because if you've already done 20 damage to everybody and you get taken out, now someone's going to pull ahead and the game's going to end probably in the next 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, it's not like you're playing Yumori and you get knocked out in the first 30 minutes and then sit through a 2-hour game.
That would be unfortunate.
Yeah, that definitely has never happened before.
Yeah, absolutely never.
I've never done that to you.
Now, have you ever sat across from an Enchantress style deck or something and decided that has to go first because you're expecting cards like Ghostly Prison and Propaganda to come out to prevent you, not necessarily prevent you from attacking, but make you spend all of your mana in order to attack with your creatures rather than spend it to cast spells?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay.
And that just kind of goes into like my general knowledge of the card base, because I can see a commander and kind of get a rough picture for like 10 or 20 cards that are going to be in that deck.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, the propagandas, ghostly prisons. Yeah, setting up the what people refer to as pillow fort, just forcing you to spend 5, 6, 7 mana per creature to swing. Aggressive decks definitely struggle once they can start setting up that little defense wall.
Yeah, so hopefully you can kill them before they even have a chance to do it. So let's start talking about a few of your particular decks. I know we have made reference to one in particular a few times here, and so let's talk about that one first, Andy. Tell us a little bit about your Linden, the Steadfast Queen deck.
So Linden is my baby.
Okay.
I built this deck to prove a point.
What point?
That mono white doesn't have to be stacks, and it doesn't have to have the best card draw or ramp to still win games.
Okay. And I've definitely lost to this deck before.
So have I. So tell us what Linden does.
All right, so Linden is 3 white mana for a 3/3 with Vigilance, and whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life. That part is secondary. The important bit is she's a cheap 3/3 with Vigilance.
And you know what? Whenever I look at a card like this, I always feel like that part that you just said is secondary would be what I put first in my deck building strategy. And that's why I like seeing this deck so much. So tell us about how you built Linden, because it's not specifically just based on life gain. That's just incidental.
True. So the first thing that kind of blows everybody's mind is it's a 30 land deck.
It's a 30 land deck with 5 fetch lands in here too, I see.
Yeah, true. We need to get our planes.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I wanted to keep the mana base really lean, so I have 20 planes and then 10 utility lands or fetch lands.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that the fetch lands are useful in deck thinning, or do you like having them for, I notice you have a Sun Titan in here that can return them from your graveyard to the battlefield in the event that you aren't drawing lands? I know you probably have your land count pretty low because you want to be drawing gas most of the time, right?
Yeah, so that's the main reason we're running as many fetch lands as possible, is every fetch land that digs out a land lowers the chance of us drawing a land by like 1.4%.
That's good math. We got a math episode, and I think that's right. And I was curious because when I was looking through this deck list, I thought I had seen an enchantment with landfall, but it's actually in your Najeela deck. But
it is in my Najeela deck.
Would something like Felidar Retreat be a card consideration? Because I see there is a care about +1/+1 counters here a little bit too. And if you're not familiar, Felidar Retreat, 4 mana, 3 and a white, you get an enchantment with landfall that says you can either create a 2/2 cat beast creature token or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and they gain vigilance until end of turn.
Funny story, it actually used to be in the deck.
Okay.
And every time I had it, it just underperformed.
Oh.
And so it actually got cut for comeuppance.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a pretty good
comeuppance is so good. So that's an instant for 3 and a white. It says prevent all damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn by sources that you don't control. And if damage from a creature source is prevented this way, comeuppance deals that much damage to that creature. And if it was prevented from a non-creature source, comeuppance deals that much damage to the source's controller. So like get wrecked creatures, and if you're going to try and do some big X spell damage to my face, it's going to do it to your face instead.
Right.
And that gives me a way to protect myself when I swing out at one person and everyone thinks I'm open. And no, I'm not.
Not today.
Yeah, and you have a few other protection stuff up here too, and the one that everyone runs to in a mono white is Teferi's Protection. I see here. I mean, it's like it's the doesn't feel. This is the way I look at it, and that might be because like when it came out, I was still pretty early in Magic, but Teferi's Protection always felt like Cyclonic Rift to me, but it didn't hurt me. But it always felt like the same like level of a Cyclonic Like Teferi's
I can
Protection
see why
is
you're
the white
saying
Cyclonic
that.
Rift.
Well, it feels like that because, again, when somebody just attacks you with everything they have, you're essentially blanking their entire board.
True.
And then you get to crack back and only deal with 1 or 2 blockers at that point.
Unless they're swinging with the questing beast, in which case they still do damage to you somehow.
That's true. The questing beast is an odd card.
It sure is. Now, I do like that you have a sub theme of just, I guess, lords, or you've got ways to pump your creatures here. You've got enchantments, so anthems with Honor of the Pure, Glorious Anthem. You have Always Watching, which I love to see in the deck. That gives non-token creatures you control +1/+1 and vigilance for 1 white. Question, looking at this deck, Promise of Tomorrow, how has that worked? Promise of Tomorrow is an enchantment for 3. Whenever a creature you control dies, exile it. And at the beginning of each end step, if you control no creatures, sacrifice Promise of Tomorrow, and you can put all those creatures that had died previously back onto the battlefield. Has that done its job yet?
It has. And it's great protection. There's one issue with it.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about it, but I'm going to change it out for reasons.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that makes sense. But there's some other cards that have come out since then, maybe some newer cards that I was curious on how much you've actually been able to play this deck since the release of Modern Horizons 2, Midnight Hunt, Forgotten Realms, some of these newer cards, and how they've worked out for you. I know that my pick for the best card from last year, Esper Sentinel, was able to make it in your deck. Mono white card draw. Has this been a big change? I know it's only like 1 extra card and you could play 20 games and maybe never see it, but Esper Sentinel, 1 white human soldier artifact creature, 1/1. This is whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card, unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. I imagine you can even put +1/+1 counters in this deck on it to make it so that it becomes nearly impossible, or maybe just not worth it anymore for an opponent to pay that mana cost for you to get to draw a card. So have you seen a benefit here?
I have. The fact that it's also a creature that can pick up a couple counters and then tax our opponents more, but still do more damage, is great. Because do you pay the 1? Sure. Do you pay the 2? Absolutely. Do you pay the 14?
Maybe not.
A card I just recently picked up that you have in your deck, I picked it up in foil, and a card that we all love on this show because we love cards that exile graveyards, Sanctifier and Vec, a 2/2 human cleric for white that has protection from black and red, and says when it enters the battlefield, exile all cards that are black or red from graveyards, and if a black or red permanent spell or card not on the battlefield we put into a graveyard, exile it. Has this done its job?
So if I ask you to guess, what do you think the 2 colors I play against the most are? What do you think they are?
Are they black and red?
They are.
I have not yet put this into a deck. I picked it up because I said, you know what, this feels like it's going to be really great for my Sigarda Humans deck, which is not an aggressive deck, but just to kind of keep other decks that might be, board wiping or sending, direct damage at my creatures if I don't have Sigarda out in check. But I haven't quite added it to the deck yet, so I'm glad to hear that it's actually doing some work here.
Yeah, so what about this card, Bereaved Survivor, one of the flip cards from Midnight Hunt? So whenever another creature you control dies, you transform Bereaved Survivor. It's a 3 mana, 2 and a white. You get a 2/1. And on the flip side, you have Dauntless Avenger. Whenever Dauntless Avenger attacks, return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. 3/2. I get that the Dauntless Avenger trigger, having the creature come in tapped and attacking, you're not going to gain the 1 life for a creature attacking since it's already been declared as an attacker, I guess, before it hits the battlefield. But you said that you weren't really building around that life gain strategy anyway, so just get it. This is basically a reanimation for you.
So are you familiar with my good old friend Sun Titan?
Yeah, it's sometimes a pretty good card, and it's actually pretty cheap now too. You can get it for under 50 cents.
The thing with the Bereaved Survivor, I'm playing a bunch of 1/1 creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Something is going to die, whether it's because I'm just swinging everything I have at you, and you're gonna have to block something, or you just don't like something I have. It will flip. And if you actually look at the deck list, just in the creatures, we have, 3, 6, 9, 12, 16 1 and 2 drop creatures.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what I just counted. Yep, 16 of them.
And everyone listening, we'll drop these links to the decks we're talking about in the show notes.
But it's cool to see these new cards. Linden's not that old either, coming from Throne of Eldraine. It's a couple of years old, but seeing all these new cards come in here and help out the strategies cards you might normally only see in Modern, like Sanctifier and Vec that we talked about already. I like seeing that. Or Nadar, Selfless Paladin, a commander for dungeoneering, if you will, that we've seen in some of the decks in our Discord and stuff. But let's talk about something with a way higher mana curve that you have. Let's talk about your Kolaghan deck. So tell us a little bit about these dragons.
Okay, so there's a story behind how I got to Kolaghan, and I'll give you the condensed version.
Okay.
It started as a Tarka.
Okay, so it was red-green initially.
Then it became Saskia.
Okay, 4 colors now, everything but blue.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became Dragon.
Okay, went up one color.
All 5 added blue.
Okay, then we went to Lathless.
All the way down to
mono red.
Just red.
And then I was like, hey, you know what this needs? Reanimation. So I put Kolaghan at the lead.
Yeah.
All right. Long way there, but we got there. And I have played against and lost to this Kolaghan deck. So it's black-red, so something Sanctifier and Vec wants to play against. Tell us what Kolaghan the Storm's Fury does.
So Kolaghan the Storm's Fury is 3, a black and a red for a 4/5 dragon with flying, and whenever a dragon you control... And my dog just attacked the door.
Your dog has an aggressive strategy as well.
What an aggressive strategy.
Apparently... I completely lost my train of thought.
Yeah, so Kolaghan, Storm's Fury, 5 mana, 4/5 dragon, 3 black and a red with flying. Whenever a dragon you control attacks, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn, and it has an ability dash. Can you let me know what that dash is there, Andy?
So dash is 3, a red and a black, and essentially it puts it into play, gives it haste, and then at the end of turn it says, no, you cannot board wipe, it goes back to my hand.
Okay. So do you typically use that dash effect in this deck, or is it more just kind of there just in case someone bounces it to your hand and you see a lot of people playing white and you're going to expect a lot of board wipes or something like that?
If I know I'm playing against somebody with a very controlling deck, I will rely more on the dash.
Okay, and Kolaghan being able to pump +1/+0, it's to all... whenever a dragon you control attacks, it's all creatures you control get the +1/+0. So essentially, Kolaghan dashed out is a 5/5. Kolaghan swinging is a 5/5. So it takes 5 turns to kill someone, to kill the control player with commander damage. Maybe only 4 turns if you have a lord out or something like that. Is that like the strategy you go for when you see someone with a control strategy on the board?
Yep, pretty much.
Okay, so because you can't really commit. So I was looking at the mana curve for this. We talked about the mana curve for the first deck a little bit. It hovered around 2 to 3 with your mono white deck, and it was very even actually between the 2 CMC slot, or the 2 mana value slot and the 3 mana value slot. But here the mana curve is really heavy at 4. So when we were talking about aggressive decks, we were talking about getting established early and being able to do damage to your opponents early. But this one, it seems like it has to wait a little bit. And although the curve is highest at 4, I do really like how even the curve is between 2 and 6. The exact same number of cards, 9 cards at 2, 3, 5, 6, and then only 1 card less than that at 7. A few more cards at 4. So tell us how this high mana value deck still fits your definition of an aggressive strategy.
Okay, so the first thing you have to look at with a deck like this is how can I get dragons into play for cheap?
Okay, so like things like I see sneak attack in here, enchantment for 4, pay a red, and you just put a creature onto the battlefield. But it says you have to sacrifice that creature at the end of the turn, so it kind of has that downside, right?
You call it a downside. I call it the second hand.
Okay, the graveyard. I like that.
So yes, a lot of this deck is based on either getting dragons into play for cheap or getting them into the graveyard and then back into play for cheap.
Okay, but then, so how are you doing that quickly in a way where you're milling yourself and only focusing on the reanimation strategies, or are you doing maybe cost reduction spells to try to make it so that you can get stuff out early? Like, what's your plan on turns 1 through 3? Because when I look at this, just at a face value, it's like maybe you're not actually casting a dragon until 4.
Right. So things like Minion of the Mighty, which is a single red for a 0/1 kobold with Menache. But he has Pack Tactics. Whenever he attacks, if you attacked with creatures with total power 6 or greater, you can just put a dragon card from your hand into play.
Okay, so this would go, perfectly well with your commander that's going to be swinging as a 5 power anyway. So you dash it out when you have them out. Yeah, perfect.
And then when you still attack with the minion, Colligan doesn't care about what kind of creature it is. It pumps your whole team. So between the two of them, you have 6 power.
Okay. Well, actually, it'll be even 7 power, right? Because he'll become a 2/2, and Colligan will become a 5/5.
No,
or 2/1.
He'll be a 1/2.
Oh, is it 0 power? I'm not looking at the card.
It's
right
a
now.
little zero. It's a little 0/1. It's a little 0/1. But I do like, though, that I'm taking a look at the stuff that you have to set up while you're leading up to that, in cards like Hammer of Perforos to give creatures you control haste. That's a very cool card. Tybalt's Trickery to counter a spell that might be problematic that's going to maybe take you out before you're able to set up. Tybalt's Trickery being a red counter spell, 1 and a red to counter a spell. Choose 1, 2, or 3. Its controller mills and then exiles until they cast a non-land card with a different name. So that's a pretty interesting card here. I also really like Rakdos Charm, that if somebody's kind of even going off with tokens, you can just maybe even take them out before they're able to take you out. Yeah, there's a lot of low value removal, or I guess just value cards that lead up to your big spells. And then there's a lot of really big scary dragons that are just going to get cheated in.
Yeah, are there any particular dragons that you are aiming for? I don't see any tutors per se in here to go find exactly what dragons you want, but
I have exactly one, and that's Sarkhan's Triumph.
Okay.
2 and a red, instant, search your library for a dragon creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library.
So is that a toolbox spell for you, or is there like one dragon that you almost always go get?
No, it is a toolbox, because sometimes you don't have the mana for like one thing or another, or say you have something in your graveyard that you absolutely want to get back, you're going to go for Bladewing the Risen.
Okay.
To put that into your hand, and then Bladewing is 3 black, red for a 4/4 zombie dragon with flying. When he enters the battlefield, you can return a dragon permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you can pay black and a red to give dragon creatures you control +1/+1 till end of turn.
Yeah, fantastic.
Take out with the win that way. Now, let's shift gears to one final deck here. Let's talk for just a couple of minutes about a deck that we have not been too nice to on this here podcast. The Commander being of the 5-color variety that seems to just accidentally go infinite quite often. Tell us about your aggressive but non-competitive, non-CEDH deck, Najeela the Blade Blossom Warriors. Tell us about Najeela and then how you built this deck.
Okay, so Najeela is 2 and a red for a 3/2 human warrior. Whenever a warrior attacks, you may have its controller put a 1/1 white warrior creature token into play tapped and attacking. And yes, I have given my opponents warriors before.
Okay.
You can pay Wooburg to untap all attacking creatures. They gain trample, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. And after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. Activate this only during combat. And I have also activated that on an opponent's turn to let them take somebody out.
Oh, beautiful.
I do like that a lot. Now we're seeing here there are some cards that people who have faced Najeela have nightmares about, like Derevi, which is a Bant colored creature that untaps permanents and helps you kind of go infinite with those combats. We're not seeing that here. We're not seeing cards like Bear Umbra, which will untap your lands when that creature deals damage.
Oh, we do see Bear
No, I do have Bear
Umbra. We do see Bear Umbra here.
Yes,
and I have Druid's Repository. Those are the 2 main ways I can go infinite in the deck.
Okay, so yeah, Druid's Repository, a 3-mana enchantment, 1 green, whenever a creature you control attacks, put a charge counter on Druid's Repository, and then you can remove a charge counter from Druid's Repository to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And Bear Umbra, being a 4-mana aura, 2 green, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has, whenever this creature attacks, untap all lands you control. So yeah, that being, Derevi was whenever a creature you control deals damage, you get to untap a permanent that you control, which you could untap 5 permanents to activate Najeela's ability again. So Bear Umbra, as long as you are able to produce that 5 colors of mana, you'll be able to do that again. Druid's Repository, as long as you're putting 5 charge counters on it each time, or you have mana to fill in the gaps while you are starting to combo with maybe your first few combat steps, and then it'll start filling in the gaps once you get more warriors on the battlefield. So that's really cool to see. Is there any particular reason why you don't play Derevi in here as well? Is it because it's not a warrior?
Yeah, he's a wizard. Get out of here.
I wanted to make sure, because I see every single creature here is a warrior. I went through and I checked to make sure every single one was. But one really cool thing that I noticed when looking through there is there's not like a vanilla warrior. Like you go to Bear Tribal and there's a bunch of 2-mana 2/2s that do nothing. But all warriors are like pumping each other up as a lord, or giving each other special keywords, trample, haste, lifelink, what have you, or maybe even draining your opponents when warriors enter the battlefield, similar to the ally strategy we talked about earlier. So and I see a lot from Battle Bond. It seems like Battle Bond helped this out a lot. Some brand new cards like Chatterfang, I imagine that's just good against green decks because Chatterfang has Forest Walk. But do you also find yourself sacrificing or being able to make squirrel tokens? Like what's the deal with Chatterfang here?
So the funny thing with Chatterfang is he is Najeela just color shifted into Golgari.
Okay, explain yourself.
So for every 1 token that Najeela makes, Chatterfang matches it.
Okay.
And whether we use those to sacrifice squirrels to get rid of creatures, or we just go, well, we have a ton of creatures out, and now we're just going to drop a Beastmaster Ascension, and you can deal with it.
Yeah.
That's fair. So it helps you with
This
the
is really
go
cool.
Yeah, it's very
really
sweet.
Cool.
Now, there is one particular enchantment in here that I wanted to talk about.
Oh, wait, let me guess.
Okay.
Is it Guardian Project?
Yeah, that's the one. That's
it's the name. You said the name of the show.
Ding.
Oh my gosh. Ding, 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 ding.
But in all talk, the aggressiveness of Najeela is really about just getting inherent advantage for attacking with creatures that inherently are good and inherently boost each other up. So we're just saying that warriors are strong and Najeela is a strong warrior tribal commander.
Yeah, we're saying we love it, and please play your Najeela decks against us. It's our favorite.
Just have a good Rule Zero conversation about it.
To be fair,
first.
Najeela does not come out often. Sliver Overlord does not come out often. But if people are like at the end of the day and we want to play a high-powered game, I will pull them out and say, cool, let's make this a fast one.
Absolutely. Now, Andy, thank you so much for your support. And we are so happy that you are the first ever patron guest on our show. Please tell everyone where they can find you online, and actually tell them where they can find your other content.
Okay, so if you're looking for me online, I don't know why you would, but I'm on Twitter at Ben Smister. Or currently, you can search for Andy Bentley. I believe I just changed it to Disappointed Ronin.
Okay.
And my podcast can be found on Twitter at Commander_Forge, which is CMDR_Forge, which is where I essentially shitpost about Magic.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, if you want to find us on Twitter, I'm on Twitter at Andy Flory.
And I'm on Twitter at WormCoilEngine. Of course, we want to give a special thanks to Ryan Nichols, our producer and editor. Thank you so much for everything you do. And Chris Wolf, who handles all of our graphic design. Thank you for everything you do. And Andy, thank you again for joining us. It has been a wonderful episode with really good insight into the aggressive playstyle strategies and a little bit of an insight into your mind as a deck builder. It was a blast. And to all you listening out there, we will chat with you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.